armed conflict, forced displacement, climate change, induced disasters, and protracted crises have disrupted the education of 75 million children and youth around the world. And that number is growing in an unprecedented way with the spread of COVID-19. Education has been hit particularly hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, with 1.53 billion learners out of school and over 150 countrywide school closures impacting 87.6% of the world's total enrolled learners.
That is huge. While other critical needs such as health, water and sanitation are being responded to, educational needs cannot be forgotten, as these have an equally detrimental impact if left unaddressed, which is why we are having a conversation about it today with education consultant Joy Issa. Glad to have you join us this morning on the show, Joy Issa.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning to you. All right, let's start immediately with the last thing I just talked about. Africa's economy stands to lose $90 to $200 billion. That's quite a whopping amount in 2020. If the crisis lingers, do you see government's commitment towards education waning in the face of competing demands in other sectors like health, etc.? What will be the way out?
Well, thank you for having me again. It's important for us to realize that the youth are the future. So there's no way the government's commitment to education can wane, because if we don't invest in the education of our citizenry, then we are jeopardizing our future. So I feel that the government's commitment to education actually will increase progressively, because we need to invest in safety measures when schools open, providing PPEs and things like that, perhaps for teachers. And so re-envisioning the education landscape needs to be at the forefront of the minds of the leaders at this moment.
Well, thank you for joining us, Joy. We know that in addition to you being an education consultant, you are also the head teacher of the Children's International School in Lekki. And I'd love to speak to you about your experiences as a head teacher at that school. The CIS, if I'm not mistaken, is a fee-paying school. And I wonder how you think that private schools have been able to capitalize off of that type of financial advantage it has in order to make things like homeschool learning easier. The interactions needed by parents and children, access to internet, definitely are, you'd imagine, to be easier among students at your school. How do you think that the transition from being at home and still learning has been for the students and the parents at the CIS?
Well, in our school, we've got a junior school, senior school, so I'm in charge of the younger ones. And because we have always adopted a blended approach, the transition has really been seamless. The blended approach means you have a combination of online learning and face-to-face learning. So that transition has been easier for a school like ours. We know that some other schools have challenges because of the sudden move to online learning or to virtual school, as some people call it. But for us, honestly, the transition has been pretty seamless. Our students are very excited to see our faces when we dial them up and have live lessons. They continue online. School has a schedule. School closes at 2:00. So for us, it has not been as challenging to transition. We've been having a good time.
Good. That's for us. I like the way you put it, for us. You could say that's, if I might add that, a highbrow school, so to say. Now, yeah. The question here is, with only 24% having internet in Africa, poor connectivity, lack of power, how far-reaching, really, can these online methods go?
Online school is effective, as you have rightly said, only as far as you have the infrastructure to accommodate it. You need to have strong internet bandwidth. You need to have your laptops, your iPads, and things like that to sustain the interactions. However, it is possible to have e-learning that doesn't require active online presence. If we invest in the production of DVDs, we invest in the production of audio files, for example, that translates the local content from textbooks to digital material, then these can be distributed around. So those who don't have access to the highbrow, infrastructure can still have access to online learning. I mean, in our research and investigation, we have to look at what other schools around the world are doing. And there's a school district in the US who is a very rural area. And what they did is they partnered with UPS and they shipped all the children's textbooks and notebooks to them.
That's lovely.
Because the students don't have internet access. So they call the parents 2 or 3 times a week, but the children have physical books and things to work with. So we also need to be creative in our approach. Not everyone has access to internet, and in this current climate, not everyone has the money to purchase data because parents have lost their jobs.
Exactly.
We'll get to talk
Schools and
about
governments, we need to be creative, yes, to say,
Well,
how do we help the children?
Yes.
Can we send them books, physical books, and not just say, okay, everybody's doing online learning, so we all do something online. We have to be realistic with the expectations.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned being realistic, because I'm sure you're well aware that in any school, in any type of educational gathering, there's always going to be a plethora of different students with different abilities, different strengths, and different weaknesses. On the topic of for lack of a better term, weaknesses, there are also children who have learning difficulties who, in the traditional framework of going to school, would have a teacher's assistant sitting by them. How do you think they're able to navigate this time without that one-on-one access with somebody dedicated to speaking to them and educating them on their level? Is there a fear you have that there could be some regression or some children being left behind during this time?
Absolutely. Honestly, it's unfortunate that there will be stragglers. There will be children who will fall through the cracks. But this is where we believe in partnerships with parents. It is important for all of us to realize that we are all stakeholders in the education of our children. We need to partner so that we can support the children's learning. Yes, typically parents have paid for teachers and caregivers to look after their children within certain hours. Unfortunately, at the moment, these children are at home with the parents. So we're supporting the parents with supporting their children. For schools like ours, again, if I may refer to our school, we do have some children having one-on-one sessions with teachers and not whole group sessions. Again, this is where the relationship between home and school is important. How do we support these children who are just beginning to speak and need speech therapy? Do we still continue the appointments with the speech therapist? Do we still continue the appointments with the learning support teacher? How do we even support those who are gifted and who were on an accelerated program? So it's both ends of the spectrum, really. Those who, the outliers, either very high or very low, those are the ones who are potentially at risk at this time. And again, conversations need to happen between the teachers, the parents, even the children, especially the older ones, so that we can collaborate to provide effectively for their learning.
Right. Now, you've talked about parents and the children. Let's delve more into that, talking about those who are quite disadvantaged. You've mentioned them in passing, kind of. What inclusive alternatives and approaches, if there are any, that governments and institutions, can adopt to carry this particular set of people along?
Right now in Lagos State in particular, or nationally, there is content that has been put online. So children can have access to some reading, some writing, some course material on TV. Again, that is like taking broad-based antibiotics and not necessarily specific to the different needs of the children. This is where we have to appeal to the government to please invest in education. It's time for government to insist on partnerships and collaboration. I feel that when the government insisted with the banks to say banks, the smaller banks, you're too small, you cannot operate in silos, you need to consolidate or you shut down. I think it's high time the government said to schools, you need to collaborate, you need to consolidate or you shut down. Earlier, when you mentioned about the new normal, where you said children had to go back to school and we had to look at space restrictions and things.
Yes.
We can no longer, the small schools, the tiny schools in these little boxes cannot effectively deliver education safely. So it's time for the government to say, look, there needs to be some collaboration, there need to be some mergers, there needs to be some consolidation so that we have more people working together to meet the needs of the children. I mean, 1.53 billion students out of school, that is a huge number. In Nigeria, if we do collaborate, in Lagos in particular, 18,000 private schools, I mean, that's a huge number. That number can shrink with the support from government. We can get bigger spaces, expertise can be merged so that we can do a better job of educating our children in safer spaces. It's time for collaboration. Honestly, it's time for mergers. Private schools, the government, and NGOs, philanthropists. It's time to collaborate so that we can safeguard the future of our nation in the education of our children.
I love that, being able to safeguard the future of all children in this country. Still on that point, though, how feasible do you think government intervention is? We know that it needs to happen, but how likely do you think it is that the government, if we use Lagos State, for example, which is where we all are at the minute, what has been your experience in terms of lobbying them or reaching out to the government for collaboration? Do you think that educational reform in this way is high on the government's agenda?
Oh, in Lagos State in particular, I know it is. And I know this because the Honorable Commissioner for Education transitioned from the private sector to the public sector. And there have been meetings, ongoing meetings with her, with other government officials, with the governor, and school owners and school leaders, with associations. And there have been multiple conversations around what to do in this new normal. How do we survive? How do we provide for the children? One of the press releases, for example, shared by the Honourable Commissioner,
Joy. Thank you. If I could just get you just to take a very quick pause. We're about to pause for a short break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Joy Issa there. Thank you very much, and stay with us.
I just still watching the morning show, and we're still discussing with consultant Joy Issa. Joy, glad to know that you're still there. Well, maybe we should look at UNESCO's recommendation, on long-distance learning and OER, that is Open Educational Resources. What do you make of that, and how it can be applied across the board, particularly in Africa?
Again, those who have access to the provision have access. They can access the materials online. They can sign up for the free schooling materials. They can sign up for the homeschooling program. Where we are right now is in the space where we need the support of the government as a populace in general. We need access to good quality education at minimum cost. Can we have stakeholders invest in education? Now, for the most part, this is a thankless investment. So I can understand where some corporate organizations may not be as willing in their CSR, publications, in publicity drives, but it is important. We must safeguard the future of our citizens. It is high time the big corporate organizations invested in education, it's a thankless service, invest in training some teachers, invest in providing access so that our children can compete with the counterparts across Africa. Before we even go global, let's look at the statistics, look at the data. The children in sub-Saharan Africa, the scores in terms of reading, mathematics are second to the bottom, second only to the poorest regions in Asia. So we're at the bottom of the ladder. It's high time we realize, look, we have to do something about this or we will be left behind. The world is moving forward. The world is becoming more digital. Artificial intelligence is being incorporated in education. And in Nigeria, we still have some parents who, prior to now, were concerned that we were letting the children use computers. And you wonder, are we in the 21st century or in the 20th century? You know what I mean? So as a nation, we need to appreciate where we are, this new normal, understand the need to really move into the 21st century in terms of our approaches to teaching and learning and education, and help our children. Poverty should not equate to a lack of access. And I'll say it again, poverty should not equate to a lack of access. Access can be made available via textbooks that are sent to children, free, good quality training for teachers, support. DSTV, for example, sends resources, I know not in Nigeria and other countries, to the poor areas for schools. Okay, why not do it in Nigeria? Why can't we have the cable networks install one or two of these things and provide that access as CSR? Access really is what our challenge is. And this is where the government needs to help us. In the private sector, it's happening a bit more, but there are many more children in our public schools than in the private schools. And until, as a nation, we focus on providing access to good quality education, we will keep churning out low-level graduates, and then we have problems with people who can't function in specific offices in our economy. So if we don't do something about this, we end up losing out, honestly.
I definitely agree with you there. And I love that response, actually. Thank you very much for that, Joy. I wanted to switch focus a little bit and continue to talk about children and how they're navigating this time under lockdown. And I wanted to ask you, I think we're all aware that in many instances, going to school, even though children might complain about it, is very much also a sanctuary. It's a place where children feel protected and safe. And where we're hearing harrowing figures and troubling statistics that say, children are at risk at home for all different types of physical and perhaps sexual abuse. Being at school is a way where they can definitely feel safe. It's also a place where many children, perhaps in the public school system, would be able to eat comfortably during the day. So during this time, once again, we are always talking about how people are suffering during lockdown, but what do you think needs to be done to really protect children who are at risk at home during this time, since they aren't going to have the access to school and the sanctuary that they would find there?
At this point, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but honestly, collaboration is the way to go. I feel that small communities, networks, if you will, need to come together and raise the children. The popular African proverb says it takes the whole village to raise a child. Yeah. So within your estate, within your little street, can we come together and have shared supervision? Now, I know we have to be mindful of social distancing. However, we have seen growing research pointing to the fact that those who are 10-year-olds and under are less likely to contract the virus and to fall sick from the virus. Now, I say the research is growing and we're following it closely, but older people are more at risk. In that case, can we begin gradually as parents, as stakeholders in our local communities, can we provide shared supervision? Can we say, okay, this mother on Monday supervises the children while they play on the street, so because it's better for them to be outdoors than inside. There's hardly power in some areas anyway, so they might as well be outside. Can they read a story together like we used to do, reading under, Tales by Moonlight under the tree? This time, can we gather around on the streets? Can we support each other? In the highbrow areas, you can do this online. There's, virtual supervision, if you will. So we need to be creative in providing solutions because honestly, there are children who are being traumatized because they have to live with parents who are equally traumatized, and parents are taking out their frustrations on the children.
Well, Joy,
It is very, very sad, but that's the reality.
Joy, interesting. But I was thinking and laughing while you were talking about people, kids, going outside, and this time parents might not particularly want that, because of the situation we find ourselves in. But a good point you raised there. Let me see how you can take these two questions in one. In Wuhan, China, students are back to school, but with certain measures, schools divided 30-30, or hand gloves. You would wear hand gloves, you will wear your face mask and all that. Here, are we thinking about post-COVID-19, how things are going to be, Should we be thinking about that? And then what positives, can be gleaned from this pandemic going forward?
Obviously, everybody should be thinking post-COVID-19. In our school in particular, we already have a plan in place for post-COVID-19 when physical school resumes, and we are beginning to discuss systems and structures that can be put in place similar to what has happened in Wuhan. Can we bring in thermal readers? Can we bring in do we have to re-envision our physical spaces to promote more social distancing? Will we have PPEs, and how much will we have? So our little ones are not frightened by teachers in bodysuits. You know what I mean? And they're wondering, who's this and where's my teacher? So we're thinking about that. And honestly, everybody should be thinking about that as well. Post-COVID-19, we have to think about the adults, protecting the adults as much as we're protecting the children. We have to think, in my opinion, we should adopt a more blended approach, because if, for instance, in Wuhan, where resumption is staggered, can the learning continue virtually while some come in physically? Can we, what can we do about this? And in some schools, I remember growing up, some children had school from like 8 to 12, and some others had afternoon school from about 2 to about 6. So is that something to revisit in a more creative manner? Can we, there's a lot of infrastructural adjustments that will need to be made. So people seriously need to be thinking about post-COVID-19 if they're not already doing so.
Absolutely.
Then your second question, I've lost track of the second question.
Oh, well, I don't think we have time for that second question about positives.
Oh, not
you
at all.
can glean. But thank you so much. While you're apologizing, you don't need to. We're glad to have you. And thank you so much, Joyce there, a consultant discussing with us. Yeah, you're welcome.